The Harlow Grand Hotel sat at the center of downtown Chicago like a crown that had decided to stay there permanently. Everything about it was polished, expensive, and designed to make ordinary people feel slightly underdressed. The marble floors reflected the chandelier light in a way that almost looked arrogant, and the staff moved through the space, like they had been trained to be invisible without actually disappearing. Abigail Monroe was not invisible. She never quite managed it, even when she tried. She was the kind of person who said good morning to the elevator, apologized to chairs she bumped into, and remembered the names of every regular guest at the restaurant on the 14th floor, where she worked 6 days a week. Her uniform was always neat, her dark brown hair always pinned back, and her smile was the kind that reached her eyes whether she wanted it to or not. She had moved to Chicago from a small town outside of Columbus 3 years ago with $200, one suitcase, and the stubborn belief that she could build something real if she worked hard enough so far. The something real was a one-bedroom apartment she shared with her best friend Diane Summers, a reliable set of aching feet, and the ability to carry 4 plates with one arm without dropping a single one. It was a Tuesday morning in late October when Ethan Caldwell walked into the 14th floor restaurant for the first time. Abigail noticed him the way you notice a storm before it arrives. There was a stillness around him that felt deliberate, the kind of quiet that powerful men wore like a second suit. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a charcoal blazer that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and his face had that particular expression of someone who had not needed to ask for anything in a very long time. James Whitfield. His assistant, a neat man in his 40s with kind eyes and the permanent posture of someone holding an invisible clipboard, spoke quietly to the host. Corner table. No menu needed. Just the espresso, black, no sugar. And whatever the kitchen considered its best breakfast plate that morning, Abigail was assigned to the corner tables. She walked over with the confidence of someone who had done this 10,000 times, set down the water glass without a sound, and introduced herself the way she always did. Her name, a genuine smile, and a quick mention that she would be taking care of him this morning. Ethan looked up from his phone, studied her face for exactly 2 seconds, said nothing, and looked back down. She had been ignored before. This felt different, less like rudeness, and more like the man had simply filed her under not relevant and moved on. It should have annoyed her. Strangely, it just made her curious. The espresso arrived. She set it down carefully. He reached for it without looking. His hand caught the edge of the small ceramic cup at the exact moment she was releasing it. The espresso went sideways. It moved in a slow and horrifying arc and landed directly on the left sleeve of that charcoal blazer. The table went silent. The entire corner of the restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Abigail felt her stomach drop straight through the marble floor. She grabbed a cloth napkin immediately, started dabbing at the fabric, apologizing in a low and mortified voice, already calculating in her head how quickly she was about to lose this job and whether she could pick up a shift somewhere else before the week ended. Ethan looked at his sleeve. Then he looked at her. His expression did not change. He said, quietly and without any drama whatsoever, that it was fine. Asked her to bring another espresso when she had a moment. That was it. No scene. No complaint to the manager. No cold performance of fury designed to remind her of her place. Just another espresso when you have a moment. As if the blazer had simply decided to be wet on its own, Abigail stood there for half a second longer than was professional, then pulled herself together and went to get his coffee. Diane heard the story that evening in their kitchen while eating leftover pasta, she sat across the table with her fork halfway to her mouth, and her eyebrows lifted so high they nearly left her face. She pointed out, with the authority of someone who had worked in that hotel for 4 years and seen how wealthy guests behaved, that Ethan Caldwell did not do fine. He was known for being exacting, professional to a fault, and entirely without patience for inefficiency. The fact that he had brushed off a ruined blazer without even blinking meant something. Diane was not sure what, but something. Abigail told her she was reading too much into it and went to wash the dishes. Ethan came back on Thursday. Same table. Same espresso order. Same silence with his phone. Abigail served him without spilling anything this time and told herself the small relief she felt was purely professional. He came back Friday, and the following Monday, and the Monday after that, by the third week, James had started tipping generously enough that Abigail quietly assigned herself to the corner section. Whenever she saw the reservation come through, she told herself it was about the tips, which was true. She told herself it had nothing to do with the way. Ethan occasionally put the phone down and stared at whatever view the window offered. Looking like a man who had won everything and was not entirely sure what to do with the victory, that part she kept to herself. He spoke to her more on the fourth visit than he had in all the previous ones combined. It was not much a comment about the eggs, a dry observation about the weather outside the window, a question about whether the kitchen could be trusted with a specific request, but he looked at her when he said it, and there was something attentive in the way he listened when she answered. Something that did not match the image of a man who found people relevant. Abigail noticed that he never smiled all the way. There was always something that stopped it just short of reaching his eyes. Like a door that opened slightly and then thought better of it, she noticed the way he looked at his phone, sometimes with an expression that was not about business but something older, something more tired. She noticed that James always ordered water for himself but never touched it, and that Ethan always slid it back toward him after about 20 minutes without being asked. The kind of small, habitual kindness that people did not perform for audiences. She was not supposed to be cataloging these things. She was supposed to take the order, keep the coffee coming, and stay professional. She was very good at staying professional. She had always been very good at it. What she was less good at. And this was something she admitted only to herself in the quiet of Tuesday nights when Diane was asleep and the apartment was still, was pretending that she did not feel something shift in the room whenever he walked into it. Something that had nothing to do with the job description and everything to do with the fact that Ethan Caldwell looked at her sometimes like she was a question he had. Not yet decided whether to ask, she told herself it meant nothing. He was a billionaire who ate breakfast on the 14th floor and had a blazer that cost more than her television. She was a waitress from Ohio with student debt and a second-hand coffee maker that only worked if you hit it on the left side. These were facts. Facts were useful. Facts kept a person sensible. She repeated them to herself on the Thursday he looked up from his phone as she set down his espresso and said, without preamble, that she had a good memory. She had remembered that he preferred the window blind half down on sunny mornings and had adjusted it before he sat down. He had noticed. He was letting her know he had noticed it was a small thing, a completely ordinary professional observation. Abigail smiled, said thank you, and walked back toward the kitchen with her heart beating considerably faster than it had any reasonable business doing. Facts, she reminded herself. Facts and common sense. She was going to need both of them. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm Abigail had not planned for and could not entirely explain. Ethan Caldwell arrived at the 14th floor restaurant every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday morning without fail. He sat at the corner table, ordered the same espresso, worked through whatever was on his phone or laptop, and occasionally said something to Abigail that was short and direct and somehow managed to stay in her head long after her shift ended. He had asked her once, on a rainy Friday in November, whether she had always wanted to work in hospitality or whether this was something she had landed in by accident. It was the kind of question that most guests never thought to ask, because most guests did not think of the people serving them as having wanted anything in particular. Abigail had answered honestly, which surprised her a little. She told him she was saving money to open her own small photography studio someday, that she had always loved capturing moments that people forgot to hold on to, and that the hotel job paid the bills while she built toward something bigger. He had looked at her for a moment with an expression she could not fully read, then said that was a specific kind of discipline. Saving for something real instead of spending on something comfortable. It sounded like a compliment. It also sounded like he was describing something he respected from a distance. He did not often close. She thought about that for 3 days longer than was reasonable. Diane noticed. Diane always noticed. She had the particular talent of a person who paid close attention to everything while appearing to be interested in nothing. And she deployed this talent regularly against Abigail with great effectiveness. She started leaving coffee on Abigail's nightstand in the mornings, with little notes that said things like, "Still thinking about the corner table," or "The blazer called. It wants closure." Abigail threw the notes away and drank the coffee because she was not going to let a point go to waste just because it was annoying. It was on a Wednesday afternoon in the second week of November that Patrick Holt walked into the hotel lobby. Abigail was finishing a double shift and cutting through the lobby on her way to the staff exit when she nearly walked directly into him. He was tall and loose-limbed, with the kind of easy smile that arrived quickly and stayed long. Dressed in the casual, expensive way of someone in creative work who had done well enough not to need to prove it, he was carrying a rolled set of architectural drawings under one arm, and he caught her elbow gently as she stepped back, laughed in a way that was entirely without self-consciousness, and introduced himself before she could apologize. Patrick Holt, architect, in town for a renovation project at the hotel. He had the manner of someone who found conversations easy and people interesting. And he spoke to Abigail like she was already someone worth knowing, which was both flattering and slightly disarming. They ended up talking for 20 minutes near the lobby fountain. He asked about the hotel. She gave him the kind of inside knowledge that only staff had. He laughed at her observations. She laughed at his. He was genuinely charming in the uncomplicated way of someone who had no hidden agenda, just actual interest in the person in front of him. When he asked if she would like to have dinner with him on Friday evening, Abigail said yes before she had fully thought it through. He was nice. He was interesting. He was entirely uncomplicated. She had been living inside a complicated feeling for weeks and was tired of it. She told Diane that evening. Diane sat up so fast on the couch she nearly knocked her tea off the armrest. She wanted to know everything. Was he good-looking? Was he funny? Did he seem like the kind of person who would ghost after 2 weeks, or the kind who would send flowers for no reason? Abigail answered all of it patiently and felt genuinely good about the whole thing by the time they finished talking. Patrick was straightforward. Patrick was available in all the ways a person was supposed to be available. Patrick did not make her feel like she was trying to read a language she had only half learned, she did not think about. Ethan at all that evening, or at least she thought about him only twice, which she decided counted as not at all. Thursday arrived. Ethan came in at his usual time. Abigail set down his espresso, adjusted the window blind, and was halfway through her professional smile when something about the way he looked at her made her pause. It was not dramatic. It was a fraction of a second of something behind his eyes before the usual composure locked back into place. She filed it away without meaning to and moved on with the morning. James caught her near the coffee station on his way out and told her quietly, in the pleasant conversational tone he always used, that Mr. Caldwell had enjoyed the service consistently and that the management had received a specific commendation with her name in it. She thanked him warmly. James smiled in the particular way of a man who knew considerably more than he was saying and left. Friday evening. Abigail dressed carefully without overdoing it. Dark green dress, her good earrings, hair down for once. Diane stood in the bedroom doorway, eating crackers and offering opinions that ranged from enthusiastic to completely unhelpful. The restaurant Patrick had chosen was a nice Italian place 3 blocks from the hotel, warm lighting, good noise level. The kind of place that made conversation easy. Patrick was already there when she arrived, standing up when he saw her, and the evening began pleasantly. The food was good. He was funny and easy to talk to. He asked about her photography and listened properly when she answered. She asked about his work and found it genuinely interesting. By the time the main course arrived, she was relaxed in a way she had not expected, laughing freely. The tension of the past weeks loosening from her shoulders. She did not notice the figure near the entrance until Patrick glanced past her shoulder and his expression shifted slightly. Not alarm exactly, but a particular alertness. She turned. Ethan Caldwell was standing at the front of the restaurant. He was not seated. He was not waiting for a table. He was standing with the kind of deliberate stillness that filled whatever space it occupied, dressed sharply in a dark jacket, and his eyes had found Abigail's table with a precision that made it absolutely clear he had not wandered in by accident. James was beside him. James had the expression of a man performing deep internal meditation. The host was speaking to Ethan. Ethan was not listening to the host. He was looking directly at Abigail with something in his expression that she had never seen on his face before. It was not the careful composure of the corner table. It was not the measured distance he wore like architecture. It was rawer than that and hotter, and it lasted for only a moment before his jaw set and he walked toward their table with the absolute confidence of someone who had decided something and was not interested in discussing it yet. Patrick rose slightly in his seat, not threatened. Just reading the room, Ethan stopped at the edge of their table, looked at Patrick with the brief, assessing glance of a man who was being extremely controlled about something, then looked at Abigail. He said her name once, just her first name, quiet and direct. And somehow, that single word carried the weight of everything he had not said across weeks of corner tables and careful distance. He told her there was a matter that needed her attention. At the hotel. Tonight, he said it with the kind of tone that was professionally worded but personally meant, and every single person at that table understood the difference. Abigail stared at him. Patrick looked between them with the gracious perception of a man who was beginning to understand the full shape of the situation he had wandered into. She stood up slowly, set her napkin on the table, and told Patrick in a calm and genuinely apologetic voice that she was so sorry and that she would explain everything. Patrick nodded with the quiet dignity of a man who had enough self-respect not to make a scene over something he had not fully had yet. Abigail walked out of that restaurant with Ethan half a step behind her, through the warm-lit entrance and out onto the sidewalk where the cold November air hit her face like a correction. She turned on him before he could speak. Her voice was low, because she was not the kind of person who made public scenes. But it was absolutely furious in the way of someone who had been holding something carefully for a long time and had just been given one. Reason too many to stop? She asked him what exactly he thought he was doing. She told him that she was not his employee outside of that hotel, that she was a person having dinner on her own time, and that he had just walked into her evening like he had purchased the rights to it, and she wanted him to explain himself right now. Ethan stood on that sidewalk with the November wind pulling at his jacket and looked at her. With an expression that was entirely unguarded for the first time since she had known him, he opened his mouth, closed it. And for the first time, in what she suspected was a very long time, Ethan Caldwell did not have a prepared answer. He said her name again, softer this time, and in it she heard something that rearranged everything she had been telling herself about. Facts and common sense, and the sensible distance between a waitress from Ohio and a man who owned buildings in 4 cities. She crossed her arms and waited. Streetlight caught the line of his jaw, and the honesty he was clearly not accustomed to wearing. And the city moved around them both like it had somewhere better to be. The sidewalk outside. Carlucci's Italian restaurant was not the kind of place where life-changing conversations were supposed to happen. It was narrow and slightly uneven, with a street lamp that flickered every 40 seconds and a flower vendor 3 doors down who was packing up for the night. Wrapping stems in brown paper and humming something to himself like the rest of the world did not exist, Abigail stood with her arms crossed and her breath coming out in small, visible clouds in the cold air. Waiting for Ethan Caldwell to say something that justified what he had just done, he stood very still the way he always did. But it was a different kind of stillness now. Not the composed, deliberate quiet of a man in control of every room he entered. This was the stillness of someone who had run ahead of his own thinking and arrived somewhere he had not fully prepared for. He said her name once more, and she shook her head. She told him her name was not an answer. She told him she was standing outside in the cold in a dress she had ironed twice, and she deserved a complete sentence. Something shifted in his face. The last layer of the professional mask came down, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the way a careful structure gives way when the one thing holding it in place finally moves. He looked at her the way she had caught him looking out the window on rainy mornings, like a man sorting through something he had been carrying alone for too long. He told her he had found out about the dinner through James, who had mentioned it without realizing what the information would do to him. He said he had sat in his office for 2 hours telling himself it was none of his business, that she was free to have dinner with whoever she chose, that he had no claim on her time or her evenings or any part of her life outside the 14th floor. He said he had been very logical and very reasonable about all of it for 2 full hours, then gotten in the car anyway. Abigail looked at him carefully. She asked him why. He was quiet for a moment. The flower vendor finished packing and pushed his cart down the sidewalk, the wheels rattling against the uneven pavement. And then it was just the two of them and the flickering light and the question hanging between them. Ethan said he did not know how to do this. He said it plainly, without apology, the way a person admits something that costs them. He told her he had spent 15 years building things, companies, structures, systems, all of it requiring precision and planning and the elimination of variables he could not account for. He said he was good at it. He said it was the thing he was best at in the world, and it had never once prepared him for sitting across a restaurant and watching her laugh at something another man said, and feeling like the floor had dropped out from under a building he thought was solid. Abigail uncrossed her arms slowly. He kept going because she had not stopped him, and because he clearly needed to get to the end of it. He told her he noticed the way she moved through a room like she was genuinely glad to be in it. He told her he had started coming back to that restaurant every week and telling himself it was about the consistency of good service and the convenience of the location, and he had believed himself for days before stopping the pretense entirely. He told her that the morning she had talked about her photography studio, about saving for something real. He had driven back to his office and sat at his desk and thought about it for the rest of the afternoon in a way that had nothing to do with admiration for her work ethic and everything to do with the fact that she was the most genuinely herself person he had encountered in longer than he could clearly remember. He stopped, looked at her directly, and said that when he had seen her at that table tonight, sitting across from someone who was looking at her the way he had been carefully not allowing himself to look at her for weeks, something in him that was usually very obedient had simply refused to cooperate. The street lamp flickered. A cab moved past on the wet street. Abigail stood there and felt something she had been managing, very sensibly for weeks, stop being manageable. She told him that what he had done tonight was not acceptable. She said it clearly and without softening it because it was true, and she needed him to understand that she was not someone who would be collected or claimed without being asked. She told him she had been sitting at that table, having a perfectly nice evening with a perfectly kind person, and he had walked in and taken that away from her without asking whether she wanted him to. He nodded, said she was right, said he was not going to argue with that. She told him that if he had feelings worth acting on, the correct move was to say so like a human being, not to appear at a restaurant like a consequence. He said she was right about that too. She asked him why it had taken him this long. Weeks of corner tables and careful sentences and looks that stopped just short of meaning anything. She asked him what exactly he had been waiting for. He said honestly that he had been waiting to be sure it was real, and not just the particular comfort of a routine he had grown attached to. He said he had needed to know the difference between wanting the morning to go a certain way and actually wanting her. And he had taken his time with it because she deserved someone who was sure. That sentence landed somewhere in the center of her chest and stayed there. She looked at him for a long moment. The cold was working its way through her dress, and she should have been more bothered by that than she was. She thought about Diane's notes and the second-hand coffee maker and the photography studio she was building toward one careful dollar at a time. She thought about all the reasons she had recited to herself about facts and sensible distances and the particular foolishness of a woman from Ohio letting herself feel something large for a man who lived in a completely different atmosphere. Then she thought about the way he had slid the water glass back toward James without being asked. The way he had said it was fine when the coffee landed on his blazer. The way he had listened when she talked about her photographs like it was the most interesting information he had received all week. She told him she was going back inside to apologize to Patrick properly, because Patrick had done nothing wrong and deserved a genuine explanation and a genuine goodbye. Ethan said, of course. She told him that after that she was going home to change out of this dress and warm up. He said he understood. She told him that if he wanted to continue this conversation, he could call her tomorrow morning like a person and ask her to breakfast like a person, and they could sit across a table from each other in a place where neither of them was serving the other and actually talk. He said he would do that. She turned to go back inside and then stopped, one hand on the restaurant door, and looked back at him over her shoulder. She told him that for the record, she had not been fully focused on Patrick's conversation all evening either, and that she had noticed him the second he walked in. Not because he was obvious, but because some part of her had apparently been keeping track of him for weeks without her full permission. She went back inside before he could respond. The conversation with Patrick was honest and warm and slightly awkward in the unavoidable way of these things. Patrick listened with good grace, said he appreciated her telling him the truth, called it genuinely terrible timing on his part, and laughed about it in a way that was mostly sincere. They finished their wine without pretending the evening was something it was no longer, and he walked her out 20 minutes later, shook her hand, and said she seemed like exactly the kind of person worth being jealous over, which she thought was probably the nicest thing anyone had said to her all month. Ethan was not on the sidewalk when she came out. There was a car idling at the curb, and James appeared from beside it with a coat that was clearly not his and held it out toward her. Said the temperature had dropped and Mr. Caldwell had been concerned about the dress situation. Then got back into the car without another word. Abigail stood on the sidewalk, holding a coat that probably cost more than her camera equipment, and laughed for the first time all evening, genuinely and completely, at the sheer absurdity of all of it. She wore the coat home. Diane was awake when she got back, sitting on the couch with tea and the expression of someone who had been mentally composing questions for the last 2 hours. Abigail sat down, pulled the expensive coat tighter around herself, and told the whole story from beginning to end, without leaving anything out. Diane did not interrupt once, which was remarkable. When Abigail finished, Diane put down her tea very slowly and said that she needed approximately 5 minutes to process this and that. Abigail should not speak until she had finished processing. 4 minutes later, she said that Ethan Caldwell had shown up at a restaurant because he could not stand watching someone else have dinner with her, and then sent a coat through his assistant because he was worried she was cold. And Abigail had the nerve to spend 3 weeks telling herself the man was just a regular customer. Abigail said she had been trying to be sensible. Diane said sensible was overrated and went to make more tea. He called at 9 the next morning. His voice was the same as it always was, measured and direct. But underneath it was something that had not been there before, something that had come up through the careful surface the previous night and had not gone back down. He asked if she was free for breakfast. She said yes. He said he would pick her up at 10. She said she would be ready. She wore her own coat. Breakfast was at a small place on Michigan Avenue that had no dress code and excellent eggs and windows that looked out over the street in a way that let the city feel close, but not overwhelming. They sat across from each other without the hotel between them for the first time, and it was different in every way. She had expected, and several she had not. He was less guarded away from the environment where he had always been the guest, and she had always been the staff. He asked questions and actually waited for the answers. She stopped managing herself so carefully and said things she normally kept inside. About the town she had come from, the father who had told her Chicago was too big for someone like her. The day she had bought her first reel camera with money she had saved for 8 months and stood in the park taking photographs of strangers until it got dark. He listened to every word of it with the full attention of someone who was not thinking about anything else. She asked him about the loneliness she had seen in him on those rainy mornings. She asked it directly because she had decided that morning that she was not going to be careful with him in the way that kept people safely apart. He looked at her for a moment, then told her that success at scale had a particular kind of isolation built into it that nobody mentioned in the beginning. That the higher the floor, the fewer people who spoke to you like a regular human being. That he had more employees and associates and contacts than he could count, and almost nobody who called just to talk. She said that sounded very quiet. He said it had been. Until recently, 2 weeks after that breakfast, Gloria Caldwell arrived. Abigail had not been warned, which she suspected was deliberate on Gloria's part. She came into the hotel restaurant on a Thursday morning, 40 minutes before Ethan's usual arrival, dressed in the particular way of women who understood that clothing was a form of communication. She was elegant and sharpened, and she looked at Abigail with the practiced assessment of someone who had dealt with inconvenient variables before. She sat at the corner table. Abigail took her order with the same professionalism she gave everyone. Gloria waited until the coffee arrived and then told Abigail, in a pleasant and entirely serious voice, that she was prepared to offer her a sum of money that would fund her photography studio completely, cover 2 years of living expenses, and leave her with enough to start well. All she needed to do was step back from whatever was developing with Ethan and allow things to return to where they had been. She named the number. It was significant. It was the kind of number that a person from a small town in Ohio, with debt and a second-hand coffee maker and a dream she was building slowly, was supposed to be moved by. Abigail set down the coffee pot. She was quiet for a moment, not from hesitation, but from the particular care of someone choosing her words properly. She told Gloria that she appreciated the clarity of the offer and that she understood. It came from a place of wanting to protect her son. She said she was not going to take it. She said not because she was in love with his money or his name or any of the things his mother was clearly worried about, but because she had been taking care of herself since she was 19 and she was not going to let someone hand her the life was building as a consolation prize for walking away from something real. She said that if Ethan wanted her to leave, he could tell her himself, and she would respect that completely. But she was not going to be bought out of a decision she had, not even fully made yet. Gloria studied her for a long moment with an expression that moved through several things before settling into something that was reluctantly close to respect. She finished her coffee, left a generous tip, and departed without another word. Abigail called Ethan from the staff break room 4 minutes later. She told him what had happened in the same direct tone she had used on the sidewalk outside Carlucci's. She was not angry, just honest. She told him she needed him to know, and she needed to know whether this was the kind of thing that was going to keep happening. He was silent for a moment, and she could hear in that silence the particular tension of a man deciding something definitively. He said he was sorry. He said his mother acted from fear, and he should have spoken to her before things reached this point. And he had not, because he had been managing his mother's opinions of his choices for so long that he had developed the habit of simply not discussing them. He said that was going to change. She said good. He said he needed to see her that evening. She said she would be home by 7. He arrived at her apartment at 7:15 with 2 paper bags from the diner around the corner that Diane had once mentioned she liked, the particular kind that wrapped everything in foil and kept it warm. He had clearly asked James to find out which diner, and James had clearly asked Diane, which meant Diane had known he was coming and had very deliberately vacated the apartment. Because the couch was empty and there was a note on the kitchen counter that said simply about time, they sat on the floor of her small living room with the foil-wrapped food between them because her table only had 2 chairs and one of them had a broken leg she kept forgetting to fix. And the city came through the window at a comfortable distance. And he told her that he had spoken to his mother and that the conversation had been direct and overdue, and that Gloria had said, after considerable honesty from both sides, that she supposed she would reserve full judgment until she had met Abigail. Properly and without a transaction involved, Abigail. said that was probably the best she was going to get. From that direction? He said almost certainly. Yes. She told him she was still going to build the photography studio herself. She said it was important to her that it was hers, built from the ground up with her own work. And she needed him to understand that being with him was not going to change the direction she was already heading. He said he understood that completely. He said he would not want her any other way. She looked at him, sitting on her slightly worn living room floor in his expensive jacket-eating diner, food from foil wrapping, and felt the last careful distance between what she had been feeling and what she was willing to call it finally close. She told him she was glad he had gotten in the car that Friday night, even though it was the wrong move made for the right reason. He said he was glad she had not thrown him off the sidewalk. She said she had considered it. He smiled then, all the way, the kind that reached everything. And she understood that she was probably the first person to see it complete in a very long time. She leaned across the foil wrappers and kissed him first. Because she was from Ohio and she had driven herself to Chicago with $200 in one suitcase, and she had never in her life waited for someone else to start the thing she had already decided to do, he kissed her back like a man who had been patient long enough. Outside the window, Chicago continued its indifferent brilliance, all lit glass and cold air, and the particular beauty of a city that did not care whether you were a billionaire or a waitress saving for a dream. And inside that small apartment, with the broken chair and the note from Diane and the foil wrappers going cold between them, to people who had been watching each other carefully from across a careful distance, finally stopped being careful. Diane came home 2 hours later, took one look at the living room, made a silent, triumphant gesture at the ceiling that she thought no one saw, and went to make tea for three. Some things it turned out the algorithm could not have predicted, but it would have given them a very high number.